This is the first Mac laptop that my family ever owned, and this is the first of a three-part series all about this 2008 MacBook. In this first video, we'll be talking about how this Mac performs with its original operating system, but with some of the changes that have been made over the past 12 years, and also how it's aged physically. And spoiler alert, one of those things doesn't go so well, and it's not the one you think. So to give you all an idea of what to expect from this laptop, this was the first MacBook that my family has ever owned. It was the main laptop, main computer for our entire family for a long time. It was something to entertain my sister and I. I actually cut together my first few sad attempts at YouTube videos on it. I actually edited a major school project on it. That was 12, yeah, God, I've been making videos for 12 years. God, I'm old. But this was primarily used for general family use, schoolwork. My mom did graphic design on this computer. On top of that, in the later portions of its life, my dad actually used it to take on job sites as his work computer. It was thrown around, it was dropped, it was thrown in a truck, it had things thrown on it, and at this point now it's been through 4 batteries. Soon to be 5, but either way, 4 currently. Now, speaking of things that have been changed on this computer, we did upgrade to 8 gigabytes of RAM. Well, I upgraded it to 8 gigabytes of RAM when I was kind of getting into tearing apart computers, and it is DDR3. It's the slowest option for DDR3, but it's DDR3 nonetheless, and with it being DDR3, it is a pretty considerable upgrade to go from 4 to 8. Apple only ever considered the maximum of this computer to be 4 gigabytes, but it was more than capable of handling 8. And because it was still fully accessible on the bottom portion, I took the original 250 gigabyte spinning disk hard drive out way back and put a 250 gig SSD in it, which after I got this into my collection, I've now upgraded to 500 gigabytes of solid state storage. That's pretty considerable since the old hard drive was, well, an old hard drive. However, the CPU in this thing is the same one from factory because you can't upgrade a laptop CPU, and it is a 2.4 gigahertz Core 2 Duo, which was the upgraded model, and we went with the upgraded model because, number one, it gave you a faster overall performing laptop, and number two, it came with a backlight keyboard, and that was actually pretty big, but we'll talk about that later. Overall, though, we have some fairly respectable hardware inside of this thing, but we'll see how that holds up later. Now that we've gone over the hardware in this computer, let's talk about the software. And this MacBook is running Mac OS 10, not Mac OS, Mac OS 10.6 Snow Leopard, which for me, I consider one of the best Mac OS operating systems to have ever come out. It is so stable. It actually feels kind of like cheating when I use it because it optimizes itself for whatever hardware you throw it on. So even on the slowest of hardware, it actually performs fairly well. Now, originally this Mac did come out with Mac OS 10.5.5, which was its launching OS. The problem is that is very difficult to come by because you have to get a recovery disk for this MacBook specifically in order to reinstall 10.5.5. And we'll get into why I couldn't really do that later with the disk drive, but I just didn't want to bother with it, and I actually personally remember 10.6 exclusively because I didn't really play with this MacBook much because it was the parents' laptop up until 10.6 was put on it. So for me, I only ever remember using 10.6, so that's what we're sticking with. So when it comes to boot up times, this thing flies thanks to that SSD. It was able to boot up from completely off to usable in just under 25 seconds, which is slow for modern standards, but when you think about how old this computer is, that's a very quick boot time compared to what was originally somewhere in the neighborhood of minutes to boot up. Now, I'm sure the more tech-savvy of you out there are probably saying that, well, using an SSD is cheating because everything under the sun back in 2008 was shipping with a regular hard drive, and you would be correct for most Windows PCs, but back in 2008 when this first launched, Apple actually offered a 128 and a 256 gig storage option in solid state for this computer. So having 500 gigs in there is just extra storage. Performance-wise, because we're limited by the actual connector, it's really going to be no different than what you would get performance-wise out of the factory solid state option that was offered all the way back in 2008. When it comes to things like opening up apps and moving around the operating system, it is very smooth. Now, we are limited by the older drivers and older web browser, so we can't really go and test too many things online. I can Google search the occasional thing here and there, but I can't really do any web tests, unfortunately, because Safari is just so old on this thing. But it does hook up to my Wi-Fi just fine, which is more than I can say about that iBook back there, which doesn't seem to want to hook up to any Wi-Fi at all, but you know, things are the way they are, I suppose. However, when it comes to the performance of this computer with things that don't rely on the internet, it performs extremely well. In fact, it performs so well that, hold on, the audio is going to get weird. It performs so well that I'm actually recording the audio for this entire episode right off of the built-in QuickTime player on the MacBook I'm talking about. It's pretty impressive. But even though it does fly through its original operating system, I'm going to save modern benchmarks for a little bit later in the next episode, because in the next episode, I'm actually going to be bumping this all the way up to the highest version of macOS, the current version of macOS, OS Catalina. And I'm doing that because with some software modifications and the hardware that I've put into this machine over time, you can actually run that. And as far as I've seen, it can run fairly respectably. We'll actually see how respectably in the next episode, but that's what I'm going to be doing. Which is really impressive to think, like, software support-wise, this thing got 8 years of software updates, but with software modification, it can run for 12 years. 12 years of software. And I know Windows PCs can do that as well on the more high-end models, but keep in mind, a high-end model of this would have been the MacBook Pro. This was a mid-ranger meant for things like schoolwork. And Windows never did a year-by-year update like macOS does. This is literally a new piece of software every year, and it does it hopefully just fine. I'll hold off on those comments until the next video when I actually have it done. Now we're going to move on to the hardware, and like I said at the beginning of the video, one of the two things I'm talking about in this video didn't hold up so well. And like I said, it probably wasn't what you guys expected. The physical hardware on this thing is ragged. It is worn out. It has seen a very hard life. The entire aluminum chassis is worn, bent, and scratched to hell. It's kind of rough. Now, to be fair, a lot of that use came from the later portion of its life when it spent times on job sites with my dad, getting thrown into trucks, having things thrown on top of it, getting dropped. So I'm not going to chalk that all up to abuse in home. This would probably be in much better shape if it hadn't been a worksite laptop. The bottom shell is actually missing its feet, and they were replaced with these weird rubberized things meant for like machinery, and one of them has already fallen off again. There's also sections on the bottom shell that have been completely worn down, so there is no more texture from the bead blasted aluminum from the factory, and you can't even read the serial number or information on the top portion of the case anymore. Something that did blow me away is the fact that the laser etched logos for the ports on the side of the laptop are completely gone. These were laser etched. That means that there's an entire layer of metal that had to be worn away for those ports to no longer be visible. The top lid did fare a little bit better than what I would have expected, but that's mainly because it was not the piece getting placed on machinery. It was the piece that just kind of protected it while it was closed. It's still dented, not enough to damage the display underneath or anything like that, but it's definitely a noticeable bit of wear when it's closed. The glass underneath for the display actually is completely fine with a good cleaning, and the display itself, despite being a kind of older, lower resolution 1280 by 800, it's still completely usable and surprisingly color accurate for its age. The keyboard as a whole has aged fairly well. The key switches are still some of the best in the industry. I don't care what anybody says about the age, but the keyboard switches on these old MacBooks that they carried on for years, literally all the way up until 2015 with the refresh, are incredible. One of the best typing experiences that you could possibly have had on a laptop ever. However, the texture of the keys has pretty much all completely worn off. They're no longer a matte finish, they're glossy because they're just that worn down, and the backlight has all but completely faded on one side. The speakers behind the keyboard are pretty pathetic, honestly, they're not good at all. But below the keyboard with the trackpad, that is a phenomenal piece of good news. The glass has the exact same texture as when it came from the factory. The click is factory fresh. It feels like exactly the way I remember it when I was a kid when we first unboxed this MacBook. I remember so fondly how it felt and the fact that it was one big button, and that has not worn out at all. It still feels brand new. The disk drive still takes disks in, but it doesn't give them back unless you reboot the computer because it doesn't register that there's a disk in there at all. And it's coming out anyway, so I'm not too broken up about that. And lastly, like I said earlier, the battery is the fourth battery in this computer, soon to be fifth, because this battery is just shot again. It's been through 4 batteries in the 12 years that we've owned it. And that's mainly because my dad has never bought the right charger for it. Not to throw him under the bus, but this takes a 60-watt charger, and like literally right now I have an 85-watt charger charging this thing. Like, that's it. And it's because my dad bought an 85-watt charger for it because they didn't have a 60-watt charger. And I think that's probably going to be one of the things I will buy for this alongside the battery, is a proper 60-watt MagSafe 1 charger. So from a physical standpoint, this MacBook is haggard, but that is the entire point of the third episode in this 3-video series. In the third video of this series, I will be tearing down and restoring this MacBook to as close to factory condition as possible, and then maxing it out as far as I can go, which with what's left will basically just be the storage. So to wrap up this first video, I always tell people whenever I talk to them about computers or any kind of technology that when you invest more into your products, you will get more in return because it will last long enough to pay back those investments. This computer was $1,599 in 2008, and adjusted for inflation, that is almost $2,000. It comes out to about $1,890 some odd dollars. But despite the battle scars, this Mac is still going fairly strong. And because it's modular, you can change parts out as they fail and keep it running for a very long period of time. The only thing that will limit this computer in the long term will be the physical ability for the hardware that it's maxed out to keep up with the software of modern demand. And in the next episode, we're going to be seeing how this computer holds up to 2020 demands, because we're going to be pushing this thing from 10.6 macOS Snow Leopard all the way up to 10.15 macOS Catalina, and seeing how it can actually hold up with the hardware that's currently in it. The 8 gigabytes of old DDR3 memory, the solid state drive, and that poor Core 2 Duo. It's going to have its work cut out for it, and I'm very excited to see how it handles itself. But until then, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss this and any other cool stuff I do on the channel with the reaction videos, the reviews, all of it. And if you guys want to see anything tested on this, make sure to leave a comment and let me know if you have any tests you want to see done on this once I have it upgraded, because once it's upgraded, I'm going to be running all modern tests, and I want to know what you guys would think would make a good stress test for this computer. Otherwise, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe like I said before, and I'll see you on the next video. Make sure to be there, and have a good one. Hey guys, just hopping in at the end here. Thanks for watching through the whole video. I hope you enjoyed it. I do still have merch. I've actually had it for quite a while, but not a lot of people know about it or care. And so if you guys want to support me or check it out just because it looks cool, go to the link in the description. You can see some of the designs I have, like the Steel Frodo in Steins Gate design, or even the Mob Psycho 100 design, and maybe even buy one if you like it, or don't. I cried myself to sleep at night anyway. So either way, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching again, and I'll see you in the next one.